very much and welcome to our talk. So the aim of our talk this morning is to try and get you thinking about the complexities of researching human populations as opposed to controlling animals in a lab, for example, and some of the difficulties that throws up and some of the ways that we can overcome those difficulties. And in particular, Children of the 90s has been very good at finding ways of overcoming those challenges. So we're going to focus on obesity, and hopefully by the time you walk out, you'll be much more skeptical of the headlines you read in the newspapers about health research and be better equipped to try and judge whether they have done good research or less good research. So my name's Laura Howe, and I've been working on Children of the 90s for about 4 years now. And my research mainly focuses on growth and development across childhood, which my family find particularly entertaining because I stopped about here. So I'll introduce Kate now, and she'll do the first part of the talk.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So I'm Kate Northstone. I've been with the study since 1995. So most of your children were 3 or 4. It feels like a very long time. And over the years, I've had lots of different research interests. But at the moment, I focus on diet and its association with health and well-being. I'm not a fan of fruit and vegetables myself. I'm more on the junk side, I hate to say. But I'm learning to get better. Okay. So as Laura said, our focus today really is to try and unravel the myths of the headlines that you'll read, and we're using obesity as the way to teach you to do that. So just to set the scene, we just wanted to make sure that we all know what obesity is, of course we do, but Wikipedia gives this really neat definition, and it tells us that obesity is a medical condition in which excess body fat accumulates to the extent that it may have an adverse effect on health, leading to reduced life expectancy and or increased health problems. So obviously most of our studies to date have looked at your children. And just to set the scene, we're in a really obesogenic generation at the moment. So currently in the UK, about 1 in 3 of our children are overweight. So we do have a real problem. And lots of studies have already shown that children who are overweight are much more likely to go on to develop heart disease when they're older. So again, it's a real health problem. Indeed, children who are already overweight have many of the risk factors that lead them to go on to have heart disease when they get older. Excuse me. So I'm going to throw a question out to all of you guys. Simply, what causes obesity? What do you understand to be the thing that makes people obese? Genes at the back. Okay, so BMI, okay, is a measure of body fatness. It's called the body mass index. And basically, there are cut-offs of BMI. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, I'm sorry. But if you're above a certain level, you're deemed to be overweight. If you're then above another higher level, you're deemed to be obese. Okay, does that help?
That is a bit of a blunt measure though, isn't
It
it?
is a blunt measure. BMI, so very simply, it's almost a ratio between your height and your weight. So you could be very tall and therefore be heavy and have lots of muscle mass. So it doesn't necessarily take into account your fat mass, but Laura will talk later about how we measure fat mass much better than that, okay? So back to the question. We had genes and we had eating too much, somebody said. Poor diet, yeah. Anything else? Lack of exercise. Any other thoughts? Okay, I think we've pretty much hit the nail on the head, and it's actually a balance. So it's purely a balance of energy in to energy out. And we have to keep those scales as even as we can. So if the calories that go in through our food and the drinks that we have are higher than the calories that we give out just through day-to-day activities and exercise, then we'll store fat and we'll become overweight and obese. Okay, so that was a really simplistic view, this balance thing, this whole energy balance thing. A very simplistic way of looking at it. There are many scientists out there who believe in the developmental origins hypothesis, which is much more complicated. So very simply, they believe that a baby in mum's tummy can be affected by the things that mum does. So mum can expose her fetus while it's growing that can then go on to affect the way that child will develop once it's born. This is also known as fetal programming. So a really neat example, which is where all this came from, during periods of famine, so a mum's energy intake is restricted, potentially her baby, while it's in her tummy, can learn to produce signals to itself when it's born to eat as much food as it can. So it had this really harsh time while it was in mum's tummy. Now it's out, let's eat. Very simply, okay? Yes? This has been demonstrated. I'm about to talk about this a bit further. That's fine. So here is a really nice headline from the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail love our kind of research on populations. They just grab it and they will mix it up and they will scaremonger, actually, as the first word, doomed. So here, this is a study that shows exactly what we've just talked about, but the mums who restrict their energy intake, who basically go on a diet while they're pregnant, their children are at a higher risk of becoming obese when they're older. Okay, another headline, not quite so dramatic, but this shows another study, mums who ate lots of unhealthy things while they were pregnant, potentially the fetuses were programmed to like junk food. So once they were born, junk food itself is just attractive to them, so they'll eat more, so potentially they'll go on to become obese. Another headline, again, less dramatic, which suggests if you follow a diet that's kind of Mediterranean, so it's high in olive oils, fruits, vegetables, potentially that can protect the unborn child from asthma and allergies. So those headlines show how diet, how nutrition, how what the mother eats could potentially affect her fetus. Okay, so I'm going to ask you now, is there anything else the mum could do that could potentially harm her child in terms of going on to develop obesity? Yes. So, pregnant mum, I'm pregnant, what could I do? What could I ingest or do that potentially could harm my fetus? Smoke. Very good answer. Alcohol, yeah. Drugs. So potentially there's all these different things that a mum could do that she's advised not to do. We know not to do these things. The gentleman at the front hit on smoking. So another Daily Mail headline that suggests children of women who smoke are more likely to become obese as teenagers. So this follows on from the famine and the energy restriction. When you smoke, not potentially, it's a fact, when you smoke, the blood vessels restrict. So the blood that goes to the fetus just can't carry as much nutrients, so the child can't grow as well. Okay, so lots of studies have found exactly that. So mums who smoke in pregnancy are more likely to have overweight children. So this graphic just demonstrates here that on average, for 10 mums who smoke while they're pregnant, who don't smoke, 3 of their children will go on to be obese. Compared to, of 10 mums who do smoke, 5 of their children will go on to be obese. So there's a definite imbalance there. Do we believe that? Could that be real? Could that be a real causal effect? You smoke in pregnancy, you cause your child to go on to be obese. Might? Oh, you're jumping ahead. That's fine. It's a really good point, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. So possibly, this is a real association. To try and explain why it probably isn't, I just want you to consider these two statements very quickly. Okay, so if I said to you, people with grey hair are more likely to get cancer. Now, I dye my hair and I'm really grey. So in theory, I'm more likely to get cancer. Anything else that could explain that association? Age. Well done. In Australia, it's a well-known fact that as ice cream sales go up, shark attacks go up. What could explain that? Surely the sharks can't smell the ice cream and come into shore and start attacking people. Has to be the weather. Okay, so sunshine. As the sun gets warmer, more people go in the sea to swim, more ice creams are sold. So this phenomenon of something else explaining the association we see is called confounding. Okay, so one more question for you guys. Can you think of anything else that could explain that association between smoking in pregnancy and obesity? Yeah, absolutely. So very simply, if you smoke, you're much more likely to do lots of other bad things. You're less likely to exercise. You're more likely to have a bad diet. You're more likely to drink coffee. You're more likely to drink alcohol. You're less likely to exercise, that kind of thing. As demonstrated here, and I'm going to hand over to Laura at this very point.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so this is just demonstrating that the women who smoke during pregnancy are likely to be different to the women who don't smoke during pregnancy in lots of other ways. So behaviours don't just assort randomly in the population. People tend to cluster into groups who are more or less healthy. So here we've got a guy who's very active in the countryside, out for a run, compared with Jim Royal, who's sitting eating a big roast dinner, drinking lots of booze, and also, importantly, is living in a very shabby house, so perhaps is from a lower social class. So all of these things could be explaining our link between smoking in pregnancy and obesity in the child. So what do? Do we just give up at that point and say, it's messy? Populations, humans, they're messy. We can't control them like we can lab rats. Well, the first thing that we do is we can measure all of the things that we're worried about. So we'll measure the alcohol, the state of repair of somebody's house, what their diet is like, how much physical activity they do. And then we can use statistics to try and deal with that and try and work out what the association between smoking in pregnancy and obesity in the child is, once you've removed the noise that all of those other things are causing. But do you think that it's possible to measure absolutely everything that might explain that link? Few shaking heads. And even if we could think of all of the things that might be going on, do you think we could measure them absolutely perfectly? More shaking heads. So just for example, going back here, this guy, he's living in a very shabbily decorated house. Is that because he's living in poverty, or is it because he's just moved in and he's about to decorate? So even if we have this exhaustive long list of things that might explain the link we're interested in, we probably can't measure them with absolute certainty. And once that's true, the statistics start to fall down. They can't completely remove the noise caused by all these other things. So we have to try and do something else to try and get at the real answer. So I'll now talk you through what we did in Children of the 90s to try and look at this question. So we asked the women in pregnancy about their smoking habits through several questionnaires while they were pregnant. And we know all about the obesity in the children, both through BMI measured by height and weight, but also through these fancier measures with the body scans that the young people did from age 9 onwards that tell us both about bone mass and fat mass. And like all of the other studies that have looked at this question, we do find that women who smoke during pregnancy are more likely to have children who go on to be overweight than women who don't smoke when they're pregnant. And even when we look at social class, diet, physical activity, and all these other things that we're worried might explain that link. When we put them into our statistical models, it doesn't change very much. We still see a very strong link between smoking in pregnancy and obesity in the child. So we could have stopped there and said, right, we believe this. But actually, we wanted to tease this out a bit more and try and look at the data in different ways to really get at whether confounding is causing this link artificially. So one of the things we did is we looked at dad smoking. So if we think that there's a biological link, something is happening to the baby in the womb because the mum is smoking, its growth is being restricted, it's being programmed to know that it's in a harsh environment and it should go on to have a high appetite and put on fat as quickly as possible. If that were true, then it really should only be the mum's smoking that is linked with obesity in the child. The dad smoking shouldn't have the same effect. Even if there's a bit of passive smoking, the amount of smoke that that baby is exposed to should be much, much less if it's the dad who's smoking compared with the mum. So if you've got your mum sitting here at home knitting, being all worthy, and the dad's outside smoking his fags, that shouldn't have a massive impact on the obesity risk of the child if it's a causal biological relationship. But what we actually find in children of the 90s is that the increased risk of obesity in the child is almost exactly the same if it's the mum who smokes or if it's her partner who smokes. So to us, that suggests that this is confounding, that all of these other things that cluster together with smoking in pregnancy are explaining that link, and that there's no such biological change in the baby causing its obesity. In fact, children born to women who are smokers but not smoking during pregnancy have almost the same risk of obesity as children born to women who smoke throughout their pregnancy. So again, that's suggesting to us that this isn't some kind of biological programming of the baby in the womb, that it's just this clustering of behaviours in the population. So our conclusion, based on children of the 90s data, is that smoking during pregnancy is unlikely to cause obesity in the child, and it's more likely to be confounding, and the fact that the women who smoke during pregnancy are different to the women who don't smoke. But you'll notice that I'm being cautious in my language here. I've put unlikely. Smoking during pregnancy is unlikely to cause obesity. I haven't made a definite statement. And that's because science is very much an incremental process. No one study alone can ever tell you a definitive answer. There are some studies that back up our findings from children of the 90s. For example, one study took women who'd had 2 babies, and they smoked in one of their pregnancies, but they didn't smoke in the other pregnancy. In that case, the only thing that's different, by and large, between those 2 children is whether their mum smoked during pregnancy. And they found no change in obesity risk across those 2 groups. So again, that would suggest that it's not a biological programming of the baby in the womb. But other studies do suggest that this is a true link. In the 1950s, smoking was just as common in high social class people as in low social class people. So this confounding wasn't such a big problem, but they still see a link between smoking in pregnancy and obesity in the child. So actually, this is very much an open question, and people are still hotly debating this issue. But from the point of view of the children of the 90s data, it would suggest that perhaps it's not a causal link and that it's just confounding. But just to emphasize, we're not advocating smoking in pregnancy. It might not be a causal risk factor for obesity in the child, but it's certainly very bad for both the mum and baby in lots of other ways. So we don't want you to go home with the wrong public health message. So just to conclude, human research is extremely complicated. People don't choose their behaviours randomly. Things tend to cluster together, and that makes it difficult to untangle what's causal and what's due to confounding. But children of the 90s is really good at developing and working on new methods to try and look at the data carefully and tell what really is causal and what isn't. But these won't always get translated into the newspaper headlines. So hopefully after you go home today and you see health research presented in the papers, you can be a bit cynical, start to think about confounding and how the researchers have dealt with that and whether you believe the results or not. So thank you very much, and we'd love to hear your questions.